Hey everyone, Greg Cazillo from Cazillo.com. Today's video is packed with information on how to improve your autofocus, how the systems work, how your AF mode works, how the area modes work, which ones to choose, make sure you're using them properly. I will mention that this is a follow-up to a couple of older videos that I had done, both on VR, vibration reduction. There's 5 different ways to call on that. Nikon calls it VR, as well as my DSLR autofocus video. I would definitely suggest taking a look at both of those so that you know that you're getting the most out of your DSLR and its capabilities. Next thing is improving your accuracy. That's going to be huge. You really need to improve your accuracy all the time. And even myself, I've been shooting for years and years with autofocus cameras ever since I first started shooting over 15 years ago. But I'm still always looking to improve my accuracy and trying to figure out what I'm doing, whether it's wrong or right. And last thing I'm going to work on today is, and give you information on today, is some low light tips and how to focus better and utilize your camera better in low light. That's always an issue on learning how to utilize what the camera manufacturer has given you when it comes to low light. If you've watched more than 1 or 2 of my videos over the last year, you've noticed that I am a big advocate of doing things manually in the camera. You know that that's just the way I prefer to shoot. That's the way it gives you the most control, whether that's with the exposure, whether that's with your focus point. The only thing that I don't do manually is with, well, 2 things I should say, is white balance, which I've talked about in an earlier video, as well as the actual autofocus itself. But I always choose my point manually. I never let the camera choose my own autofocus point. And in Nikon, they call that wide area autofocus. I stay away from it. I think maybe I've used it twice when I've had to hand my camera to someone else to use. And it's probably in a pretty controlled situation anyway, so that they really can't screw it up. But still, I very rarely use it, and I suggest to you not to use those auto modes, the auto area AF. It's just not a good way to go, all right? Because you can't choose your point. You don't know where your focus is going to be, basically. Your primary 2 AF modes are the single and continuous. And of course, there's a manual, but I rarely use it and really only need it when I'm shooting, say, product photography, that kind of thing. Especially if something has a solid color and there's no contrast for the focus sensors to pick up. That's when you really need to utilize that manual focus. But again, I'm on a tripod controlled situation in the studio, and so that's when I'm going to use that. Single is for still subjects or when you're shooting on a tripod, that kind of thing. Continuous is for moving subjects like sports or kids that never stop moving anyway. And so those are the 2 main types. Most of our cameras are in the front of the camera. Next to the lens, you're going to have a switch that goes from continuous to auto. Every camera is different, so you're going to have to read your manual on how to choose that and how to pick that right mode, or how to switch in between those modes. Now, Canon calls them one-shot and servo. Nikon calls them single and continuous. You're going to hear me refer to them as single and continuous. Speaking of Canon, they also have a mode, and I don't know if it's good or bad. I haven't used it enough to be able to say. I think it's Servo. What do they call it? Servo, single servo, AI focus. That's it. It's called AI focus, and it's supposed to switch in between single and continuous as the subject is moving. So again, I haven't used it enough to say whether it's good or bad, but all I can say is practice to make sure that you know what you're doing and you have the right one. One other thing that I will note on setting up the camera, I prefer to use the AF beep. It makes me work better. That doesn't mean that it's right for everyone. It doesn't mean that it's built into every camera, but I use that AF beep a lot, and it's set on all of my bodies to use. And again, that's only on the single, not on continuous focus. So it works out for me very well and allows me to work a little bit quicker, a little bit better, and it's just my preferred method of shooting. We just went over how the autofocus performs, whether it's a single, meaning it will focus and lock, or whether it's continuous, which means it's going to be tracking the subject as it's moving. So that's one part of the autofocus system. The next part of the autofocus system is your AF area modes. Both Canon and Nikon call it the same thing, I believe. And so bottom line is, it's how your focus point is chosen. Where is that point, or where is the sensor that is chosen to basically for the autofocus system to lock on to? As I mentioned, stay away from the wide area focus mode. It's completely automatic. It's going to randomly choose. It's supposed to kind of lock on the faces depending upon the type of lens that you have. I don't trust it. I don't think it's accurate enough. Maybe in the future it'll be great, and we'll all wonder why we never used it before. But I just find it hard to believe that it's going to work as accurate as choosing the point yourself. All right, so 90% of my shooting is done with a single point autofocus. I set it on that single point, and then I move that point in between on my two bodies. I think there are 52 or 53 numbers of points or of sensors, and so that's my preferred method. I don't understand why people wouldn't also want to turn all of those sensors on. That's one of those things that the more the merrier. If you're able if you have to focus and recompose, it's going to end up messing you up a lot. You're going to lose focus because your depth of field is parallel to the camera, and so if you focus and then recompose, your depth of field is going to change. It's a parallel plane, and so it's going to move and change. When if you're shooting at with a shallow depth of field, or you're real close to something, your depth of field is going to be pretty small, and so you could be pushing it out of focus. The next one to use that's called, at least in the Nikon, I'm not going to go over the Canon ones in this area because you get the point, is the dynamic area. Basically what's happening in the camera is that you're choosing the point, and it's also taking into account the information around the sensors, or the sensors around the one that you chose to also focus. That is not good for portraits. Unless you're really far away, any kind of a tight headshot or a tight, say, 3/4 shot, you definitely don't want to be using this dynamic area AF. What you do want to be using this for sports, moving objects, moving people, moving stuff like that. That's where this works out really well, and I use it for sports and events all the time when my subjects are moving, like a triathlon that I shot not that long ago, or a bike race that's coming up for me. And so that's the one that would be using in that particular situation. Like I said, wide area AF, stay away. Don't want to be using. It's too automatic, and it's just not reliable. Nikon also has something called 3D tracking, and if you read your camera manual, it actually explains it quite well. Basically what happens is in the dynamic area mode, which again is set in each camera completely different ways, so you need to read the manual on how to do that. It allows the camera to follow the subject, the AF to follow the subject as it moves across the frame, and it stores the colors that you focused on, that you initially focused on, and then it tracks it going across the frame. And again, that really depends on the composition of the image. Most of the time I would think that your composition is going to want to change as the subject is moving, so your mileage may vary on that and whether you like it or not. It also does not work when the colors are repeated in the background as well as the foreground, or the same colors appear multiple times in the image. This is definitely going to be one of those times where you're going to have to read your camera manual to figure out how these things are done and set properly on your camera. You have to consider how they work best for you, as well as the type of images that you want to create. So read your camera manual, understand how they work, and then apply that to your shooting. And if you need to, take your camera manual with you, put it on your smartphone, do whatever you have to do so that you have that information with you, whether it's in your head or whether it's in your pocket on your phone, so that you can apply that knowledge later on. As far as setting up your camera is concerned, make sure you turn on all of those points like I mentioned. Always focus on the eyes in a single portrait. Always, unless it's not the image that you want to create, basically, you should have a single point on the eye, and that's the best way. You don't want the dynamic area mode of the Nikon cameras. It's not going to work well. It might pick up the cheek, it might pick up a different area, you know, it might pick up the eyebrow. That means that your eye is not going to be tack sharp, and that's what we want, is tack sharp images. Also, do your best to not focus and recompose. Doing that can hurt your images. They might not look right. They might be a little bit out of focus. You might not understand why, and so that can be an issue. So do your best to not do that. All right, basically, if there's a focus point that fits your composition, use it. Obviously, the better the camera, the newer the camera, the more AF points, and so that can help with your composition. All right, so next thing, oh yes, practice. You've got to be able to practice and move your camera, be able to move your points around quickly. If you don't practice, you're not going to improve. It's not going to help your focus, your shots. You know, you just got to practice. You got to work on it as much as possible. Personally, I prefer to set up my shutter speed for focus lock. I don't like to use that rear button on my camera for focus lock. I don't know why. Just the way that I've always shot, you know, back to my early cameras. I never had that extra button there in the back, or at least I never used it, so that's one of those things that's really personal taste. Now, one other thing that someone had mentioned not that long ago, and I think it was in a comment somewhere, is the cross-type sensors that are in a lot of cameras. Basically, what's happening with those is the majority of your sensors in your camera are either horizontal or vertical, and they're rectangular, and they look for contrasting colors. Now, with a cross-type sensor, you actually have a physical cross. You have a part of the sensor going up and down. You also have a part of the sensor that's going horizontally. So what's going to happen there is that one's going to be a little bit more accurate. It's going to, if you have a horizontal line and you also have horizontal sensors of the regular sensors, the focus might not lock as easily. My suggestion is that 75% of that is marketing hype, all right? 25% of that is real knowledge, real information that is actually pertinent, is probably a good way to put it. So, bottom line, don't worry about it too much. Apply it when you can. If you're not able to lock on to something when you think you should be able to, you might need to move that point a little bit. You might need to focus and recompose in that instance. But do your best to use a sensor that's closer to your intended composition rather than going back to that center. And don't rely and don't worry about that marketing hype of the cross-type sensors. I really don't think it's an issue. I've never had a problem. I've shot cameras from D40, D100, D200, D300, D3S. I've shot a couple Canon cameras like a Mark II, the 5D Mark I, Mark II, a bunch of them, 7D, 5Ds. I've really never had a problem with only the cross-type sensors working, and so don't worry about the marketing hype in that instance. Finally, let's talk about some more ways to improve your focus. That's one of the big parts of a great image is focus, having that really tack sharp focus in the right place, as well as depth of field. They kind of work hand in hand. Exposure and then composition. Those are the big three parts of an image. So you got to have that focus is the main one. In my opinion, that's the first one, because if it's out of focus, doesn't matter how good your exposure is, doesn't matter how good your composition is, it's still trash. And that brings me to the point in saying, don't put out images that are out of focus. Just don't do it. They're trash. They're junk. You know, chalk it up as a learning curve. It's just the way it is. Don't put out those autofocus images, please. All right, especially if you're doing it as a paid job or if you're a professional. Don't get caught putting out those images like that. I've actually worked for photographers in the past that have done it all. It's not that bad. It's fine. Send it out. No. Don't do it. Please don't do it. So, next thing, think about your focus. Where should it be? Where does it need to be? Where does it work best with your your composition of the whole image or the lighting or whatever? So that's something you really need to think about. All right. In low light situations, that's usually where we have the most trouble focusing. First thing is there are AF assist beams both on a lot of strobes, whether they're from Nikon or Canon or either other manufacturers. you can use those. By the way, those AF assist beams typically only work with the center focus points. They don't work with the outside ones, so keep that in mind. Next thing, if you're having trouble focusing, you're probably in pretty low light. That means if you use a faster lens, the lens is gonna allow more light into that sensor, and so you're gonna have a better accuracy rate. If you're talking about complete darkness, it's just the way it is. You're not gonna be able to focus. You have to have some kind of an AF assist or something else that's going to basically give the sensor something to lock onto. So more light, AF assist beam, something along those lines. Next thing, look for contrasting colors, for that sensor to lock onto. And on my shirt right here, you're probably not going to be able to focus right on this part of the gray part of my shirt. But if you can't see the face for some reason, or you might be able to focus on the logo on the shirt, that's probably going to be a focal point anyway. So look for those contrasting colors, the black and the white, or a color or a line or something like that. It's going to allow the camera to lock onto, basically. Next one we talked about a little bit is practice. Practice, practice, practice. You have got to spend time and practice and learn your equipment. And in order to get anywhere in photography, you've got to spend the time. So this is one of those things where if you don't spend the time to do it right, you're going to be frustrated with it constantly. So spend the time. So in today's video, I've gone over some methods that should help you to improve your focus in your images. Hopefully it helps you or guides you the right way in the right settings to use on your equipment. Make sure you do read your camera manual and make sure you do that practice like I mentioned. As it talks about in the book Outliers, you have got to be, in order to really be proficient, you need at least 10,000 hours of what I call deliberate practice in order to be great at photography or to be at least accomplished in photography. So if you haven't read the book Outliers, it's an excellent book. I highly recommend it, especially for entrepreneurs. Great book, but you've got to put in that 10,000 hours in order to really be proficient. And again, it's not just pick up the camera and play with it. It's deliberate practice, deliberate shooting, over and over and over, and knowing your equipment like it's an extension of your arm. In a class that I took, and I think I might have mentioned this in an earlier video, in a class that I took a while back for my firefighting, which I've gotten into as of late, they talk about, and it's this blog, it's actually here on YouTube, they're called Traditions Training, and one of the things that those guys talk about is 3 a.m. familiarity with your equipment, with your methods, with everything. And so that's really what you're looking for. You shouldn't have to even think about it. That camera, that lens should be an extension of your hand, and you should be able to walk into a room and just see everything, and it just happens, and you can just see exactly where the shots are, how to compose it, how to do everything. As you spend time, as you get towards that 10,000 hours of time, you will start to see that. You will improve, but there is no way to do it without spending that time. Part of it is reading the manual, and I know nobody ever wants to hear that, oh, I got to read the manual. Nobody wants to read it. In fact, I put it together a shelf the other day for a friend and didn't touch the manual, but fortunately I had already done it, so I had the experience on that particular piece, and the exact same one. I didn't have to read it. So that's my tip of the day. Hopefully you stuck around through the whole video. Let me know any comments or concerns, questions. If you do have questions about any kind of photography, please ask away in the comments. In the meantime, let me know how I did. Greg Cazillo, Cazillo.com. Keep shooting. See ya.